"Mom, why didn't you tell me you were living like this?" Those were the first words my son said when he stepped through my front door in Arizona, and the look on his face told me he had just discovered something he never expected to find. I didn't answer right away. I simply stood there holding a grocery bag with a gallon of milk, a loaf of wheat bread, and a carton of eggs. The afternoon sun spilled through the dusty front window, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floor. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Daniel stared past me into the small house I had called home for nearly 12 years. Then he slowly set his suitcase down beside the door. What happened next changed both of our lives forever. I'm Margaret Hayes. I'm 72 years old, and until recently, I believed some truths were better left buried. Looking back now, I realize I was wrong. The house sat on the edge of Prescott, Arizona, tucked between a dry hillside and a quiet road that most drivers barely noticed. It wasn't much to look at. The paint had faded years ago. The front porch sagged slightly on one side. The mailbox leaned at an angle no matter how many times I tried to straighten it. But it was mine. At least, that's what I told myself whenever the loneliness crept in. That Tuesday afternoon had started like any other. I woke up before sunrise, made myself a cup of coffee, and sat at the kitchen table listening to the hum of the refrigerator. The mornings were always the hardest. They reminded me of the years when my husband, Richard, would sit across from me reading the newspaper while I scrambled eggs. He'd been gone almost 9 years now. Some days it still felt impossible. After breakfast, I watered the small patch of flowers behind the house. The Arizona heat had already settled in by 8 o'clock. By noon, the temperature climbed past 90 degrees. I spent the rest of the morning organizing old paperwork and sorting through bills I'd been putting off for weeks. Nothing unusual. Nothing important. At least that's what I thought. Around 3 o'clock, I drove my aging sedan into town for groceries. The air conditioner barely worked anymore, but I kept the windows cracked and managed. On my way home, my phone buzzed. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. I smiled immediately. My son rarely called during work hours. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered. "Mom," he said. His voice sounded strained. "Are you home?" "I'm almost there." "What?" There was a pause, long enough to make my stomach tighten. "Good," he finally said. "I need to see you." Before I could ask another question, the call ended. I remember staring at the phone at a red light, confused. Daniel lived nearly 800 miles away in Colorado. We talked every few weeks, sometimes longer. Life gets busy. Families drift apart. At least that's what I had convinced myself. 45 minutes later, I pulled into my driveway and nearly dropped my keys. A rental car sat parked in front of the house. A tall man stood beside it. For half a second, I didn't recognize him. Then he turned toward me. "Daniel, my son, my only child." He looked older than the last time I had seen him in person. More tired, more serious. And as I climbed out of the car, I noticed something else. He wasn't smiling. He walked toward me slowly, his eyes scanning the house, the yard, the rusted porch railing, the cracked driveway. Then he looked directly at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." Daniel stood in the middle of my living room as if he had walked into a stranger's house. His eyes moved slowly from the worn sofa to the faded curtains I had sewn myself years ago. Then he looked at the stack of unopened coupons on the kitchen counter, the bottle of blood pressure medication beside the sink, and the old ceiling fan that rattled every time it turned. I suddenly became aware of everything I had stopped noticing. The scuffed floor, the chipped paint, the silence. "Mom," he said again, softer this time. "When was the last time you replaced that refrigerator?" I glanced toward the kitchen. "I do not know. Maybe 15 years ago." His forehead tightened. "It barely works. It still keeps the milk cold." He did not answer. Instead, he walked toward the hallway and looked through the open bedroom door. I followed a few steps behind, feeling strangely nervous in my own home. The room was tidy. The quilt on the bed was neatly folded. Richard's photograph still sat on the nightstand where it had always been. Daniel picked up the silver frame and stared at his father's picture for a long moment. "You still keep this here every day?" he asked. "Of course." He nodded slowly and set it back down. Then he surprised me with a question I had not expected. "Why did you never tell me things were this bad?" I blinked. "What do you mean?" "The house, the bills, the car." He shook his head. "Mom, I drove behind you when you pulled into the driveway. That car should have been replaced years ago." I gave a small smile. "It gets me where I need to go. That is not the point." His voice carried frustration now, but it did not sound directed at me. It sounded directed at himself. I walked back into the kitchen and began putting groceries away. Bread in the cabinet, eggs in the refrigerator, milk on the top shelf. Familiar motions. Safe motions. Daniel remained standing near the table. "How long have you been living like this?" he asked. I paused. Living like what? Alone. The word hung in the air between us. I closed the refrigerator door. "Since your father passed away." "That is not what I mean." I looked at him carefully. Something was different. He was not seeing me the way he usually did during our short phone calls. He was seeing the details. The things a person could not hide behind polite conversations. The things that lived in the spaces between words. He pulled out a chair and sat down. "Rebecca and I thought you were doing fine." I lowered myself into the chair across from him. "I am doing fine." "No," he looked around the room again. "You are surviving." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Outside, a dry Arizona wind brushed against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. The house felt smaller than usual. Finally, Daniel leaned forward. "Mom, I came here because something happened last week." My stomach tightened. "What happened?" He hesitated. "I found something that did not make sense." I felt a chill despite the heat outside. "What kind of something?" Daniel reached into his jacket pocket and slowly removed a folded envelope. It was old, creased, yellowed at the edges. The moment I saw my own handwriting on the front, my heart stopped. I had mailed that letter nearly 4 years ago. I stared at the envelope without touching it. For years disappeared in an instant. I remembered sitting at this very table late one evening, carefully writing Daniel's address on the front. I had enclosed photographs from Thanksgiving, a birthday card for my grandson Ethan, and a handwritten letter telling my son how much I missed him. When no reply came, I convinced myself he was busy. When months passed, I told myself not to be needy. Eventually, I stopped expecting an answer. Now that same envelope sat on my kitchen table between us. Daniel gently placed it down. "I found this in a storage box at our house," he said. "It was never opened." I felt my chest tighten. "What do you mean it was never opened?" "Exactly what I said." His voice was quiet. It was hidden with a bunch of old paperwork. I looked at the familiar handwriting. My own name. My own return address. The stamp was still attached. The seal had never been broken. "I mailed it," I whispered. "I remember mailing it." Daniel nodded. "I know." Neither of us spoke for a moment. The refrigerator hummed softly in the corner. Outside, the wind carried dust across the driveway. Everything felt strangely distant. Finally, Daniel reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out another envelope. Then another. Then another. He laid them side by side across the kitchen table. My hands began to tremble. Every single one carried my handwriting. Different years. Different stamps. Different occasions. Christmas. Birthdays. Anniversaries. Some of them I barely remembered sending. "Where did you get these?" I asked. "The same box." His jaw tightened. "There were 23 letters, Mom." 23. The number hit me harder than I expected. 23 attempts to stay connected to my son. 23 pieces of my life sitting forgotten in a cardboard box. I looked away because suddenly I could not bear to see them. "I thought you did not want them," I said quietly. Daniel frowned. "What?" "After a while, I thought maybe you were tired of hearing from me." The words felt foolish as soon as they left my mouth, but they were true. Loneliness changes the way a person thinks. It makes silence feel like an answer. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead. "Mom, I never saw any of these." "Not one. Not one." I studied his face. The confusion there looked genuine. So did the hurt. Then another memory surfaced. A birthday party Ethan had celebrated 3 years earlier. I had mailed a gift. It was returned weeks later with a label claiming the address was incorrect. At the time, I assumed I had made a mistake. Then there was the Christmas video call that never happened. The invitations I never received. The photographs that stopped arriving. One by one, old memories began fitting together in ways they never had before. Small things. Easy things to dismiss. Yet together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. Daniel seemed to be reaching the same conclusion. He stared at the letters scattered across the table. "Something is wrong," he said. "Very wrong." I looked at the envelopes again. For years I believed distance had pulled us apart. For years I blamed time, geography, and growing older. But as I sat there staring at the evidence, another possibility emerged. Maybe distance had never been the real problem. Maybe someone had been standing between us the entire time. That evening neither of us turned on the television. Neither of us reached for our phones. The letters remained spread across the kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle neither one of us wanted to solve. As the sun disappeared behind the Arizona hills, long shadows filled the room. Daniel picked up one of the envelopes and carefully examined the postmark. Then another. Then another. His expression grew more troubled with each one. "These were mailed from Prescott," he said quietly. "They should have reached Colorado in a few days." I nodded. "That is why I stopped sending some of them. I assumed they were not welcome." He looked up immediately. "Mom, do you really believe I would ignore 23 letters?" I wanted to answer no. I wanted to believe that. But years of silence had a way of rewriting memories. I did not know what to believe anymore, I admitted. Daniel stared at the table for several seconds before standing up. He walked toward the living room window and folded his arms. Outside, the porch light illuminated the cracked walkway leading to the driveway. Everything looked peaceful, ordinary, yet neither of us felt at peace. Finally, he spoke again. "Do you remember when Ethan stopped calling you?" The question caught me off guard. Of course. When was that? I thought for a moment. Maybe 3 years ago. Daniel nodded slowly. He did not stop calling. I frowned. "What do you mean?" He told me several times that he left voice messages. A chill moved through me. I never received them. That is exactly my point. He turned toward me. The more I look at this, the less it makes sense. I sat quietly while old memories resurfaced. Missed birthdays, canceled visits, invitations that never arrived. There always seemed to be an explanation. A scheduling conflict, a lost package, a forgotten phone call. At the time, each incident appeared harmless. Now they felt connected, like stepping stones leading somewhere I had never bothered to look. Daniel returned to the table and sat down again. "Last week I was cleaning out boxes in the garage," he said. "Rebecca asked me to help make space." At the mention of her name, something tightened inside me. Not suspicion exactly, just discomfort. Rebecca and I had never argued. We had never exchanged harsh words. Yet there had always been a distance between us. A polite wall neither of us acknowledged. "The box was buried behind old tax records," Daniel continued. "I almost threw it away without opening it." "Why did you open it?" He gave a humorless smile. "Because I saw your handwriting." I lowered my eyes to the envelopes. My handwriting. My words. My attempts to stay connected. "There was something else in the box," he said. I looked up. "What?" Daniel hesitated. For the first time all evening, uncertainty crossed his face. "A notebook." My heartbeat quickened. "A notebook?" He nodded. Someone had written dates beside phone calls, letters, cards, and packages. The room suddenly felt smaller. "Whose handwriting?" I asked. Daniel slowly exhaled. "I do not know yet." His answer should have reassured me. Instead, it worried me more. Because deep down I suspected that once we discovered who had been keeping those records, nothing in our family would ever look the same again. The next morning I woke before sunrise. For several minutes I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling around me. Usually those quiet hours brought a sense of comfort. That morning they brought questions. When I entered the kitchen, Daniel was already there. A cup of coffee sat untouched beside him. The notebook rested on the table. He had been studying it. I could tell from the tired look in his eyes. "Did you sleep at all?" I asked. He gave a small shrug. "Not much." I sat across from him and looked at the notebook. It appeared ordinary. A simple black cover. Nothing remarkable. Yet somehow it felt heavier than the stack of letters beside it. Daniel opened it carefully. The first few pages contained dates. Nothing else. Just dates written in neat handwriting. Then came short notes. January 12th. Birthday card intercepted. March 3rd. Voicemail deleted. July 21st. Package returned. My stomach tightened. Intercepted? I whispered. Daniel nodded grimly. That is the word that keeps appearing. He turned another page. More entries. More dates. Some matched occasions I remembered clearly. The Christmas gift that never arrived. Ethan's school photograph I had asked for but never received. The anniversary card I mailed after Daniel and Rebecca celebrated 15 years of marriage. Every missing connection seemed to be listed there. Someone had been documenting everything. I looked away from the notebook and toward the window above the sink. The desert sky was turning pale blue. A few birds moved across the horizon. The world outside seemed normal. Inside my kitchen, nothing felt normal anymore. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" I asked. Daniel hesitated. "I think I do." My pulse quickened. "Who?" He closed the notebook slowly. I am not ready to say. His answer told me more than if he had spoken a name aloud. The silence between us carried its own meaning. Around noon, Daniel suggested we drive into town. He claimed we needed groceries. We both knew that was not the real reason. Neither of us wanted to sit in the house thinking about the notebook. During the drive, we passed familiar places. The pharmacy where I picked up prescriptions. The diner where Richard and I used to eat breakfast on Saturdays. The small bookstore that had survived despite years of declining business. Every corner held memories. As we stopped at a traffic light, Daniel suddenly asked, "Mom, do you remember the year Ethan won the science fair?" I smiled faintly. Of course. I mailed him a telescope. He never got it. I turned toward him. What? Daniel kept his eyes on the road. He thought you forgot. The words settled heavily in my chest. Forgotten. That was exactly what I had feared for years. Yet now it seemed someone else had been planting those fears on both sides. When we returned home later that afternoon, a pickup truck sat parked across the street. An older woman stepped out and waved. I immediately recognized her. It was Carol Bennett, my neighbor of nearly 8 years. She crossed the road with a warm smile. "Margaret," she said, "I heard your son was visiting." Then she looked at Daniel, and her expression changed. Not surprise. Relief. As though she had been waiting a very long time to meet him. "There is something I think you should know," she said quietly. Carol glanced from me to Daniel, and then back again, as if deciding how much she should say. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow across the street, and for a moment nobody spoke. Finally, she folded her hands together and took a slow breath. "I have lived across from Margaret for almost 8 years," she said. "And there is something that has bothered me for a very long time." Daniel straightened immediately. "What is it?" Carol hesitated. "Your mother used to wait for you." I felt my cheeks warm. "Carol," she gently shook her head. "No, Margaret. He deserves to know." Daniel looked confused. "Wait for me." Carol nodded. "Every birthday. Every Thanksgiving. Every Christmas. She would tell me you might be visiting. Sometimes she baked pies. Sometimes she cleaned the guest room. Once she spent 2 days decorating the house because she thought her grandson was coming." I lowered my eyes. I had not realized anyone had noticed. "Mom." Daniel's voice was barely above a whisper. Carol continued. "Most years nobody came, but she never complained. She just kept hoping next time would be different." The silence that followed felt heavy. I could see Daniel struggling to process what he was hearing. He looked at me as though he were seeing an entirely different person from the mother he thought he knew. "Why did you never tell me this?" he asked. I forced a small smile. What would have been the point? His expression fell. Carol stepped closer. "That is not all." Daniel looked back at her. "There is more." She nodded slowly. "About 4 years ago, a delivery driver came by several times. Packages, letters, certified mail, things addressed to your mother." My pulse quickened. "I remember some of those." "So do I," Carol said. "Because more than once I watched someone take them." Daniel's face hardened. "Take them?" Carol nodded. "Your mother was not home. A woman would arrive shortly afterward and collect them." I felt a strange chill move through me. "A woman?" Carol looked directly at Daniel. "I only met her twice. She introduced herself as family." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Did she tell you her name?" Carol hesitated. "Rebecca." The name landed between us like a stone. Nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Daniel stared at the ground for several seconds. Then he looked up again. "Are you absolutely certain?" Carol nodded without hesitation. "I never forgot her. She was polite, friendly, but something felt odd about the situation." My hands trembled slightly. For years I had accepted every missed letter and every lost package as bad luck. Now those explanations were crumbling one by one. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Rebecca told me she barely communicated with Mom." Carol gave him a sad look. "Then somebody owes you an explanation." She said goodbye a few minutes later and returned to her house. After she left, Daniel remained standing in the driveway. The Arizona sky had turned orange and purple above the distant hills. Finally he spoke. "Mom, I think I know whose handwriting is in that notebook." I swallowed hard. "And?" He looked toward the house, toward the letters waiting on the kitchen table. "I think we are about to learn just how much was hidden from both of us." That night neither of us spoke much. The notebook sat on the kitchen table beside the letters, and every time I looked at it, I felt as though an invisible wall was slowly crumbling. Around 9 o'clock, Daniel carried several storage boxes in from the rental car. "There is one more thing I brought," he said. I watched as he placed a faded cardboard box beside the table. The edges were worn. Dust covered the lid. It looked like something forgotten in an attic for years. "What is that?" I asked. Daniel stared at it for a moment before answering. "The box was sitting underneath the one that contained your letters." My stomach tightened. He carefully lifted the lid. Inside were photographs, greeting cards, school drawings, old envelopes. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then I picked up the first photograph. It showed Ethan standing beside a science fair display. He could not have been older than 10. A blue ribbon hung proudly from his shirt. Tears immediately filled my eyes. "I never saw this." Daniel nodded quietly. "I know." Beneath the photograph was a handmade birthday card. Crayon lettering. Crooked stars. A child's handwriting. I opened it carefully. "Dear Grandma Margaret, I hope you come visit soon. I miss you. Love, Ethan." The words blurred as tears gathered in my eyes. For years I had believed my grandson stopped thinking about me. Yet here was proof that he had reached out. More than once. I continued sorting through the contents. Christmas cards. Family photographs. Copies of school certificates. Mother's Day messages. Small pieces of family life that had never reached me. Each item felt like recovering a lost year. Across the table, Daniel sat silently. His expression grew darker with every discovery. Finally, he picked up a sealed envelope. "Mom," he said softly, "look at this." I took it from him. The handwriting belonged to my granddaughter Lily. She would have been 13 when she wrote it. The envelope had never been opened. With trembling hands, I unfolded the letter inside. "Grandma, Dad says you are busy a lot now, but I wanted you to know I made the honor roll. I wish you could come to my recital next month. I love you." I pressed the paper against my chest. For a moment, I could not speak. The years suddenly felt heavier than ever. Not because they were gone, but because they had been taken from us one small piece at a time. Daniel lowered his eyes. "I do not know how to fix this." His voice cracked slightly. "I do not even know where to start." I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "You did not do this." He shook his head. "Maybe not, but I should have noticed." Neither of us spoke for several moments. Then Daniel reached into the bottom of the box and removed a thin folder. Unlike everything else, it was carefully organized. Dates, notes, copies of shipping receipts, tracking numbers, records. My pulse quickened immediately. Someone had not only intercepted our communication, someone had documented it. Daniel slowly opened the folder. The first page contained a familiar handwriting sample. We both recognized it instantly. This time there was no uncertainty, no doubt, no room for another explanation. Daniel stared at the page for several seconds before closing his eyes. When he finally looked up again, the sadness in his expression had been replaced by something else. Clarity. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "I am calling Rebecca. And this time, I want the truth." The next morning arrived far too quickly. I found Daniel sitting on the back porch before sunrise, staring out toward the distant hills. A mug of coffee rested beside him, untouched. The folder lay on the small table between us. Neither of us had slept much. Some truths refuse to stay quiet once they have been uncovered. Around 8 o'clock, Daniel finally picked up his phone. He looked at me for a moment. "I think you deserve to hear this." I nodded. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He pressed the call button and placed the phone on speaker. The line rang twice before Rebecca answered. Her voice sounded cheerful at first. "Daniel, how is Arizona?" He did not return the greeting. "We need to talk." The silence on the other end was immediate. "What is wrong?" she asked. "I found Mom's letters." Another pause. Longer this time. "What letters?" Daniel opened the folder and glanced down at the pages. The 23 letters that never reached me. The birthday cards. The photographs. The packages. The notebook. The word notebook seemed to change everything. Rebecca did not speak for several seconds. When she finally did, her voice sounded different. Smaller. Careful. "Daniel, I can explain." I closed my eyes. Those 4 words told me more than any denial could have. Daniel remained calm. "Then explain." What followed was not an argument. It was something sadder. Piece by piece, Rebecca admitted to things she had spent years hiding. At first, she claimed she had only set aside a few letters because she thought they caused tension. Then she admitted there had been more. She said she worried that I would influence family decisions. She said she wanted fewer complications. She said she believed distance would make life easier for everyone. Every explanation sounded weaker than the one before it. I sat quietly and listened. Not angry, not shocked, Just tired. Deeply tired. Daniel listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked only one question. Did Mom ever do anything to deserve this? Rebecca could not answer. The silence stretched so long that I wondered if the call had disconnected. Finally, she whispered, No. Daniel lowered his head. That is what I thought. Another long silence followed. Then Rebecca began crying softly. She spoke about mistakes, about poor decisions, about years she wished she could take back. Part of me felt sorry for her. Another part of me thought about the unopened letters sitting on my kitchen table, the birthdays that had passed, the school events I never attended, the grandchildren who believed I had forgotten them. Some losses cannot be measured in dollars or years. They are measured in moments. Daniel eventually ended the call without raising his voice, without accusations, without anger. When the phone went dark, he sat motionless for several minutes. Then he looked at me. His eyes were red. I am sorry, Mom. The words broke something inside me. Not because I blamed him, because I knew he truly meant them. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. None of us can change the past. He nodded slowly. Maybe not, but I can change what happens next. For the first time since his arrival, the weight in the air seemed to shift. The truth was finally out in the open. It was painful, messy, imperfect, but it was no longer hidden. And sometimes that is where healing begins. The following week passed more quietly than I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no sudden miracles, just a series of small moments that slowly began putting broken pieces back together. Daniel extended his stay in Arizona. Every morning we drank coffee on the porch and watched the sun rise over the hills. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we sat in silence. Neither felt uncomfortable anymore. One afternoon he asked if I wanted to look through the old photographs from the box again. We spread them across the dining room table. There was Ethan at 10 years old holding his science fair ribbon. Lily smiling beside a Christmas tree. Family vacations I had never known about. Birthday parties I had missed. For years those images would have filled me with sadness. Strangely, they no longer did. Now they felt like bridges. Proof that connections had existed all along, even when I could not see them. A few days later my phone rang. It was Ethan. For a moment, I simply stared at the screen. Then I answered, Grandma. Hearing his voice again felt like opening a window after years in a dark room. We talked for nearly an hour. He told me about college, his classes, his plans for the future. Before hanging up, he said something I will never forget. I always thought you stopped writing to us. I closed my eyes. I never stopped. There was a pause. Then he said quietly, I know that now. Similar calls followed. Lily called the next evening. Then a week later we arranged a family video chat. It was not perfect. There were awkward moments. Questions without easy answers. Years cannot be repaired overnight. But for the first time in a very long while, everyone was speaking honestly. One evening Daniel and I sat on the porch watching the sky turn orange above the desert. Mom, he said, I still want you to come back to Colorado with me. I smiled. To rescue me? He laughed softly. No. I learned pretty quickly that you do not need rescuing. The answer surprised me more than it should have. Because somewhere along the way I had started believing I was the fragile one. The forgotten one. The woman left behind. Yet the truth was simpler. I had survived 9 years alone. I had built a life. A modest one, perhaps, but a real one. Daniel nodded toward the house. Then come because you wanna. I looked across the yard. The old porch. The flowers behind the fence. Richard's favorite wind chime hanging near the door. This house held memories. But memories did not live in walls. They lived in people. A month later I packed several boxes and loaded them into a moving truck. Not because I was being pushed out. Not because I had nowhere else to go. I chose it. As we drove away from Prescott, I glanced back one last time. The little house grew smaller in the distance until it disappeared beyond the curve of the road. I expected sadness. Instead I felt peace. Some journeys begin when you leave home. Mine began when I finally discovered where home had been all along. It was not Arizona. It was not Colorado. It was not a house or a street or a city. Home was the people who loved you enough to search for the truth. And after all those lost years, my son finally found his way back to me. In the end, that changed everything.